I just wanted to say we're joined by Keifer Furtak. My apologies for the mute. An absolutely incredible individual on the left who was first kind of seen with Budrino Politics, which is a really good source for information. He makes things accessible. He makes things understandable. And I think that he could be one of the voices helping to make the left actually heard by the mainstream and even by the right, who we disagree with on many things, but we still have love for them and want them to come join the light side where we're all treated with love and respect. I won't take any more of his time. Keifer, what is your idea to save the world, sir?
All right, so my idea to save the world is more so actually kind of just like a way of how we can go about saving the world. I really want to focus on everyone else's ideas and how we can try and implement that kind of stuff, because I think on the left, there's a ton of really, really good ideas. I think the hardest thing is getting all of the stuff we want implemented. And I'm going to kind of describe three kind of like strategies we can go about doing that. Because to start off, I think we can agree that the left lacks financial capital. We just don't have the money that Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, Charlie Kirk, even the centrist, large scale media institutions have. We don't have that same kind of money. We just don't. And although I think there's promising, like new initiatives that we're going to kind of like start and go into now, we're still just so far behind them. It's going to be very hard for us to compete with those really large institutions. So the main thing I'm proposing today is ways we can do, the ways we can mainstream leftism, mainstream these kinds of ideas and stuff without having that money, without having that power in central institutions like media, like CBC, Global News, and stuff like that. So the three things I'm going to say, first thing I'll start off is that all of us have an impact on politics, whether we realize it or not. All of us post online. If you're here, you really like politics because you're paying attention to a stream that's political on a weekend. You're not playing Call of Duty. You're here right now. So if you're here, you're really into politics. But a lot of people aren't. And a lot of people are very disenfranchised. They don't really want to get involved. And to kind of fix that, we need to engage these people. And I feel like the left has done a pretty good job in terms of our like main strategies and stuff like that. But I still feel there's room to grow. And I feel like we should try and do this at a grassroots level in combination with the new media institutions. I know Andre is going to talk about the Harbinger Media Network, and that's something that I think is really cool. And I think that's something that we can combine at a grassroots level. We can create communities around that. We can promote that at a grassroots level, and that will really help us accomplish this, because ultimately the Harbinger Media Network doesn't have the power that Ben Shapiro does, or Jordan Peterson or people like that. So the first way I think we can really work on mainstreaming leftism is trying to use cultural capital with people. And I think most of us know what the word capital means, just something that holds value. Your car, your house, this computer I'm speaking to you on, it's worth some form of money. But like I was going back to earlier, we on the left kind of have to look at ways outside of financial capital to use things that are different types of capital to be able to actually go out and influence society, because ultimately we all kind of know here we're behind where the right is, we're behind where the center is in terms of like mainstream influence, and there's a lot of work for us to do. So the first way I'm proposing is that we use cultural capital. And I'm sure all of us will see our friend back here, Joe Biden, riding with Biden, all right? But I'm not sure if everyone remembers, but in this speech, he tried to use cultural capital. Cultural capital is kind of like cultural knowledge, patterns, things that you know about that holds value. So an example of cultural capital is knowledge of hockey in the office. You can talk about your peers. If you understand hockey and someone says, hey, did you see the game last night? If you know hockey, you'll say, oh, yeah, the Leafs won. And that can help you create a bond with that person. Or if your workplace has a hockey fantasy pool, you can create bonds with your coworkers about your knowledge of hockey. Joe Biden failed at using cultural capital when he hopped up on stage and cluelessly played Despacito on his stupid phone that he struggled with for like 10 seconds because he was trying to use cultural capital to appeal to like like voters who speak Spanish and voters who are like have like Mexican heritage. He tried to use cultural capital, but he did it really wrong, and it looked really bad because he was playing Despacito on the stage. Everyone looked at him like, what the hell? That's a bad way of using cultural capital. But a good way of using cultural capital, for example, on the left, is finding people in communities that are typically right-wing and not trying to just insert politics into it blindly, but something like cars. Cars are very right-wing in terms of community. Like most people who like cars are pretty right-wing, especially older cars and stuff like that. But if you have interest in those communities and you can kind of talk about stuff like unionizing or talk about stuff that's just, racism or things like that, you can use your cultural capital with the bond you have with people to advance your argument. A perfect example of cultural capital is memes, right? We all understand memes. We all know memes. We can share memes and people will understand that. People will get that pretty quickly. That's a great way of using cultural capital, especially if the memes are like a reference to like a movie, literature, some kind of dumb, Ruth Conda meme, whatever it is. That's using cultural capital. That's a great way of advancing your argument and forming a bond with someone. And that's the next thing I really want to talk about is emotional capital. When we're trying to sell leftism, we need to focus on emotion a lot more. One of my professors currently is doing work on emotion and politics and stuff like that. And it's really interesting because he said to me that, you kind of you can't have emotion and logic be separate. They're two of the same thing. And when it comes down to it, you can't separate those two, and ignoring that and thinking humans are some kind of political supercomputers and we make our decisions based off of policy and unbiased, that's just not true, right? Studies have shown people care about who their leader is, how they speak, like what they represent, what they look like, how they talk, and the way they talk makes them feel. The other day, Joe Biden at the that terrible, terrible debate, one of the things Joe Biden did well for his older viewers is he looked in the camera, just like I'm looking in the camera at you right now. And Joe Biden said, "Listen here, Jack, go out and vote for me." And he kept pointing at the camera aggressively. But the reason he did that is he was making an emotional connection with the audience, especially the older people sitting at their home. They look at the TV. Joe Biden's looking at them. He's pointing at them. He's making an emotional connection. And I think this is probably where the left is the weakest right now, is we need to work on creating emotional bonds with people. Because I've been in politics for a long time. Like I've cared about it since I was a kid. Like I remember seeing Jean Chrétien on the poster in my class. I've been into politics since then. And one of the things I learned over the years is that I can I can propose whatever logic to people. I can defeat them in whatever debate, but they still wouldn't listen to me sometimes. And I was like, what the hell, why? Like people would admit to me, yeah, you're right, but I'm still not going to side with you. One of the things I think I realized is that you have to create an emotional bond with people. And this can also relate to communities. This also relates to the Harbinger Media Network with these new podcasts. A big thing about these podcasts is not just the podcast, it's the community built around it. It's people who become friends. It's people who meme. Rob Rousseau's a great example of that. He'll talk to people on Twitter all the time and make jokes and kind of create this emotional capital with audience so that when people listen to him, you kind of trust him more because you know him. He tweets at people. He responds to people. And I feel like this is one area where the left can improve on, mainly because a lot of us are very theory-driven, policy-driven. A lot of us tend to be really into politics. But that emotional component isn't always there. Like, I'm guilty of that. I see a centrist or a conservative, I just want to tell them to F off. But to mainstream leftism, we really have to focus on making emotional connections with these people to get them to listen to us. Because frankly, some of these people will listen to our policies, but they just straight up don't like us and they don't want to interact with us. I think, Matt, you're a good example of someone who's really positive, and especially online, I think that attracts a lot of people being, optimistic and stuff like that. Because ultimately, it's hard to sell leftism because, we're telling you that everything's not going to be okay, that there's problems in society. If we don't address the climate crisis, we're all screwed. And we're telling you something that's a really hard message to swallow. And it's much easier to just ignore it than it is to believe in it. And I feel like that's where the difference is with leftism compared to centrism, right-wing people, even stuff like religion, is those things tell you everything is going to be okay. And they kind of attract you to it because it gives you an answer. It tells you everything's going to be okay. You know, religions say that there's a God. Right-wing people will say, don't worry about the environment. Climate change is fake. And it's easy to listen to that because it's an easy pill to swallow, because it's something it tells you it's going to be okay. And I feel like that's why we really have to have a really specific influence on emotion when we try and sell left-wing ideology, because we're selling something that's not fun to talk about. We're selling something that's not easy to look at. And we're selling something that will most likely alter most people's outlook on the world if they do believe it. And that's something that's really hard to digest. And a really easy way to get someone to digest that is to have an emotional connection with them so that they'll listen to you. And throughout my life, I've done different experiments. I wish I could do it through my university. I wish I was doing a master's if, university was affordable. But I've done different experiments throughout my life to try and, go off of this hypothesis. And I think I've seen some success. If I frame a certain argument in a certain way to one of my coworkers at the factory I used to work at, they'll listen to me because I have white privilege. And, if I say something in a certain way, they'll probably believe me. Same thing with making emotional connections with people. If I focus less on logic and try to focus on a friendship and have someone trust me, they'll just, straight up believe me more when I say something about policy and leftism and things like that. And then the other third one I just wanted to mention quickly was social capital. When we're trying to mainstream leftism, we need to create kind of an environment with social capital that people want to come to us. And social capital is something basically that can be described as your connections with society, people that kind of helps you. So someone like Justin Trudeau was born with a ton of social capital because his daddy was the prime minister and he didn't have to work as hard as someone like most of us watching this, right? None of our parents were the prime ministers. We have less social capital than Justin Trudeau did. But one of the things that's hard about the left is within the left, we don't have a lot of social capital as an institution, as an ideology. It's much easier to be right-wing because if you're right-wing, you work for your right-wing uncle's, car dealership. There's a lot more money in that stuff. There's a lot more social capital because right-wing and centrist people control a lot more of the economy than left-wing people do. So I think that's another thing we have to focus on, that is also like helping each other out, creating emotional bonds with each other. But as we expand leftism to the mainstream, we have to focus on making sure that we offer something to people that counters what they would get with being friends with centrists or being friends with conservatives. Because those people centrists and conservatives typically tend to have more money, more power, more influence in society. And people on the left, we just don't have that as much right now. So that's something that if we focus on, I think that's something we can really pitch to people and it'll help naturally attract that. So the three main things I'm saying here is, focus on cultural capital when we're trying to mainstream leftism through stuff like memes, through stuff like, bonding with someone over cars, using cultural knowledge we have in all the different places of our lives, right? Like I play video games. If I can go into the gamer community and try and influence some people about leftism, that's the way to do it, because ultimately we don't have much time left with the climate crisis. We got to do this fast, and we just don't have the money that the centrists and the right-wing people do. So we have to do this at a grassroots level. The institutions, the podcast, the Harbinger Media Network, that's going to be something we have to work with. And, that's something that's really good too. But we also have to, at a grassroots level, start changing the way we interact with other people. And this is something that everyone that's listening to this is something we can all do. We can all change. I'm not perfect. I've made a lot of mistakes, but it is something that personally I'm trying to work better on through something like my podcast, where I do have listeners who are centrists. I do have listeners who are conservative. And if I can talk to those people, create emotional connections with them, and use stuff like cultural capital, memes, humor, and stuff like that, maybe I can, change their mind on a couple policies or stop them from going down a rabbit hole into something really dangerous. That's the way forward, I think, here. The most important thing is I think there's a ton of really good ideas out here in like the left wing field, but the hardest part is getting this stuff implemented, especially with the time limits we have. And I think the best way to do it is share memes, make bonds with people, get emotional connections with people so they respect you. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, a lot of these people, it doesn't matter. You can defeat them in a debate completely. If they don't like you, they don't like you. Humans are biased. Like I said before, we're not computers. We're not the type of people who, you know, separate our feelings from our decisions. No matter how much we try, we're still human. That's what being human is to me. And ultimately, that's a part of politics that even in political science, we don't study anywhere near enough, is the emotional component of politics, the emotional component of voting and things like that. We don't talk about that enough, but that really is something that we need to focus on because we don't have the money to mainstream leftism, in time. We just don't have the institutions. Everyone else is so far ahead of us. We need an advantage to get ahead of these people. And when we look at social movements, which is something that I've studied in school, that's how a lot of successful social movements work, is that they use different forms of capital besides money to bring people in, welcome them, create communities, create a space where people feel comfortable, emotionally connected, where people can, express their culture and create interactions based off that understanding of culture. And so just wrapping up here, I think IDC is a great example of this, is how, we make memes at IDC. We use cultural capital and Justice Greens by, the name Justice Greens, and we kind of got people trusted us that we were Green Party members. We used that cultural capital, and we had a really large effect on that leadership race. And I feel like another thing that IDC is doing pretty well too is our focus on creating memes and our focus on also being nice to people, creating that emotional connection. Because there's a lot of people, like I said, you can present a certain argument to them. If they don't like you, they're not going to listen to you. That's just the way it is. And I feel like a lot of us on the left, some of us can be unlikable if you disagree with us. So the thing I would challenge everyone to do right now is just try to think about the influence you have, because 40 years ago, you didn't have as much influence. There wasn't the internet, right? You only really interacted with people you saw on the phone, people at work and stuff like that. But now we are all actors in the reality we build. We all have an impact on how this works. And the way we go about it is actually pretty important. And I feel like if we adjust the way that we're doing strategies and stuff like that, I think we can really get an edge where right-wingers and centrists, I don't think centrists and right-wingers are using these strategies properly. I don't think right-wingers are using emotional connections properly. I don't think that centrists are using emotional connections properly. They're definitely not using cultural capital properly. I think this is something that we have a big advantage. And if we take this step forward, I think I'll just put it this way. I think we can actually, I'm a pretty pessimistic person, but I think if we take the right steps and, try to do this in a grassroots way, I think we actually can do something to address the climate crisis and all the many plethora of crises we face right now.
Awesome. Thank you, Keifer. I think I agree. I was starting to become a little bit of a doomer in a lot of ways. And then with the Justice Greens being somewhat successful, and I want to be clear, it's not just Justice Greens. It's like Alberta Advantage, who's coming up soon. Other people that kind of came out and helped broadcast that as a push from the left. And I don't know how specifically coordinated we want to get into like all those details and things like that. But I think that there really was a sentiment that we can make the world a better place if we kind of just work together and help amplify comrades and whatnot. I think like what you've raised, I think is really important. I'm a little bit dense. Can you dumb it down for me? What
Sure.
specifically am I doing to like implement what you're saying on like a daily basis? How am I making the words that you just said practical to me as a person who is a little confused?
Sure. So for terms of like emotion, I would think about your interactions with people. So the average person's interactions on Twitter, your interactions with your family, your friends, your coworkers, and political topics come up a lot in conversations. And if you see someone saying something problematic or, something like that, I feel like instead of trying to just change their mind or tell them what they're saying is wrong, or just trying to influence your peers, as you know, to some degree, we are all activists, we are all actors in this. Try to make a connection with emotions with people when you talk about that stuff. So if you're calling someone on the phone, or if you're online's probably the best example. If you see one of your friends and they say something racist or something, the first, your reaction shouldn't just be, oh, you're a racist person, you're canceled. I think you should try and look at them and see, okay, can I frame this argument to this person in a positive way based around emotion to try and talk them down and get away from that without just insulting them or attacking them? Because it's something that I feel that a lot of us have gotten really into, is just when we disagree with someone, we get angry at them. When we see something we disagree with, we get angry and we want to push those people away. And I feel like it's something we should do the opposite with. We should focus on an emotional connection with them, as how can I make this person like me? How can I make this person listen to me, rather than, okay, I'm just going to tell this person, they're stupid for what they said. Because us on the left, I think we make up a pretty narrow part of Canada or America, wherever we are. And ultimately, we have to make connections. If we want more people to believe what we believe in, we have to focus on emotional connections with people outside of us, people who we might see as enemies, people who we might see as people we don't agree with. But if we just hate those people, unfortunately, I think we're just so outnumbered that it's very hard for us to, kind of influence those people if none of us like each other.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I want to apologize to you and people watching the stream. We keep having the video pop in and out. That's a Skype glitch. So quickly resolving that here. Oh, there we go. Pops out again. So just kind of building on that a little bit, like, how do you keep from, I think it's natural to be angry and frustrated with some of the conversations you see. Is there any tips or tricks you have with kind of keeping that even tone and being more strategically minded instead of just going off and bullying that liberal?
I don't think I'm the best person to talk about this, because I definitely go off and cyberbully. Well, not cyberbully, but I'll be, not, there's definitely improvements I can do, but I feel like you kind of have to make a decision. Is this person can I change this person's mind, or can I not change their mind? If you don't think you can change their mind, it doesn't matter. But if you do think you can change their mind, then I feel like you kind of have to approach it as, okay, I don't like this person right now, but if I can even sell one idea to them and it's worth it, that's so much better than me telling this person off. Because if I tell this person off, or I upset them, or I give them a bad impression of the left, it doesn't matter what kind of policy we propose. People just won't like us. They won't get involved with us because they have negative feelings. And I do think that was kind of one thing, the Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders thing, that's something else. But I do think with some of the Bernie Sanders people, I think the best campaigners for him were the people who didn't get mad, the people who reached out to people, the independents, all the other people, and successfully proposed, the ideology of Bernie Sanders, but they didn't lose their temper. And it's something, we're all going to make mistakes, right? Like, all of us are going to tell some centrist to F off online. All of us are going to get upset. We're all going to make mistakes. I think what's important is just, if we try for the majority of the time to interact with these people and be nice to them, even just on the surface. You don't have to like these people, but if you can just try to focus on creating an emotional connection with them, just enough to pitch just an idea like PR. If you can pitch an idea like PR, proportional representation, like making Canada's democracy more fair, that's something that could change all of Canada. So that's something that, for me, I've been able to successfully pitch that to people who are centrist, conservative, things like that. And that's something I tried to focus on. Is I feel like we have great cohesion. Okay, we don't have great cohesion in the left-wing community, but I feel like we have okay cohesion. What we need to focus on is that cohesion outside of our community. And it's okay if we mess up sometimes. It's okay if we make mistakes. What's important at the end of the day is if we can just if each one of us reaches out to certain people and we can change some policy at a grassroots level, that can change the polls in so many different things in Canada very quickly within a couple of years, just by building bridges with people instead of, just trying to stay in our own communities.
Awesome. And you've touched on this a little bit more, so I'm wondering if you can touch on it a little bit, because a few people are mentioning this in the comments. So as an example, I've always liked the framework that maybe someone else is experiencing the conversation from the outside or watching the conversation and thinks about what's being said. Obviously, the online discourse is usually not connected to material needs in your community, but that general thought of connecting with the person, not that you're specifically arguing with, but the person who's watching that as a third party, is that something you can build on a little bit?
Yeah, like that's something like I feel like that's something that's just thinking for a second here.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough.
Like, so basically like what people from someone looking outside on like these interactions and stuff like that.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to it while you
Sure.
formulate your thought, because I was doing that while you were speaking. So an example of that is, I think with IDC, we have like an online interaction guide that you can check out on our website, joinidc.co. And in that guide, we talk specifically about what to kind of keep in mind when you're having an online conversation. Because yes, you're talking to that one person, you're trying to convince that one person. Oh, and we've got John C. Kelly in the chat. He's the one who authored that report. It's absolutely beautiful. The online engagement guide. Basically, you're talking to one person, yes, but you're probably not going to convince that one person. They're behind the keyboard. They're comfortable in their pajamas. They don't want to be convinced of anything. But maybe you've got like 10,000 people or more watching that conversation, right? So by engaging with facts, by engaging with sources, by keeping emotion out of it, and keep saying you're not talking to that person, you're talking to the 10,000 people watching you, it helps to kind of drain your anger and your emotion from that conversation, because that one individual who's trying to antagonize you, it almost gets to the point where you almost kind of feel bad for them, because they don't see the bigger picture and they don't understand that they're literally destroying their point the angrier they get. They're losing the cause, they're losing the people. So for me, that's one thing that's been super helpful in kind of keeping an even keel when you're talking with people online that you might not enjoy.
Exactly. And like for example, kind of like that I had before was just like throughout my life, one of the ways I try to use my capital as a white person is I grew up in like a pretty poor neighborhood. So I've worked a lot of like shitty jobs with people. And a lot of the people I've worked with, the white people, usually tend to be pretty racist. And like the people I grew up around and stuff like that. But those people, if I reach out to those people in a certain way and try and keep my like not get angry, or like in a workplace, if there's a conversation at lunchtime and I'm talking to one person, there's other people around. If I can divert that anger, especially with, certain white people, I find people will blame immigrants for their poverty. But I remember a few times if I frame something successfully about, okay, well, it's not immigrants that's causing your poverty. It's the free trade deals. It's corporations. It's the workplace. That really, I feel like, changes things, because I feel like exactly what you said, if people see all those people around see someone getting angry, someone getting upset, that'll push all those other people away from that, because they assume similarity with that person. They assume similarity with the person you're talking to. Like when Joe Biden was talking to that guy about guns and Joe Biden's getting angry and asking to fight him and pointing at him, that was a terrible thing, because then all the other people who like guns looked at him and said, well, this guy's getting angry at him. I feel just like that person who's getting talked to and talked down to. I don't want any part of this. So yeah, I think that's a really good point with that, keeping in perspective the different people who see that kind of stuff.
I think Biden's an excellent choice of just things not to do. All of his little goofs and gaffes off camera have been just absolutely a delight to watch. What not to do. Is there anyone you look to as things to follow? Like you mentioned, enemy of the show, Rob Rousseau. Is there anyone that you specifically look to and are like, this person's doing incredible work, this is what we should be copying?
Yeah, like I think like Canadian podcasts in general, so like Rob Rousseau, Alberta Advantage, Sandy and Nora. I think podcasts are a good way to create kind of like an emotional connection with the listener, also like a cultural connection with the stuff you talk about. Um, I feel like too with those podcasts, the way they interact with their fans, kind of like what I said with Rob before, that's a really good way of creating a community. And I think that's one thing we have to focus on. The left is just focusing on making a community that people want to be a part of. If we can have a group of leftist gamers, a group of leftist, film critics, a group of leftist sports fans, we can build these kinds of communities based off of things like podcasts or movie reviews and things like that. That's a really easy way to kind of invite people because ultimately a lot of people are just lonely. And right now with the pandemic, we're seeing social consequences that are basically unprecedented, right? Like we haven't really seen this before where so many people have been so isolated, not being able to see each other. And that's why I think we've seen such a spike recently of people going into the far right, falling down that rabbit hole because it's a community of people and people will, if you have prejudiced beliefs, those people will support you. They'll joke around with you. They'll make memes with you and people fall down that rabbit hole. But we're trying to do it the good way. We're not being extremists. We're trying to bring people in to feel welcome, to feel safe. So I feel like in terms of Canadian podcasts, I think all of them, especially the ones on the Harbinger Media Network when that comes out, are a really great place to start. But if it's something you're listening to, focus on the community and getting involved with that. So listening to podcasts or YouTube videos or looking at memes just yourself, that's just, you in an isolated experience. But if you interact with other people, that makes it way more fun. And that's what I think a lot of the great Canadian podcasters do is they create a community online for people to talk to, for people to make memes, joke about. And that's something that's, I think Rob Rousseau's a great example of that, with the way he basically like combines satire and, extreme sarcasm and stuff like that with his fans and creating a community, but that makes people feel welcome. I feel like that's something that, whether you're a creator or whether you're someone who like a listener, I guess, or like a consumer, I think it's all important for everyone to get involved on either side of this. And I think the consumers of left-wing media and content are just as important as the creators. And ultimately, too, you as a consumer can also be a creator. You can create a meme related to a podcast. You can create a meme related to a video. There's many ways you can interact and create a community that people can really, something that makes people want to be a part of it. Because I feel like that's something that's so new for the left. These institutions, these podcasts, this media, it's so new compared to like some of the right-wing stuff that have been there for a little bit longer. That's something that we really need to focus on is bringing people together in a community based around something and, organizing through that way, organizing through emotion, organizing through friendships and stuff like that.
Awesome. I think it's a really good overview on like the practical side of how to apply these things and kind of like, yeah, very clear there. I'm wondering, technically speaking, one of the things that I think I first saw you on was TikTok. Like, technically speaking, what mediums do you think we should be focusing on being more engaged in? Like Twitter, we had some people talk yesterday about how the right is really taking over Facebook. I think Christo talked about that too. Like Facebook is something the left hasn't figured out, but the right has completely dominated. I personally look at Facebook and I just see like boomers and stuff, and I'm like, I can't do it. I just can't. Is there other areas you think the left needs to focus our efforts on? Even if it is just Facebook.
Yeah, I think like in terms of like what I was talking about earlier with like the grassroots activism and that at the grassroots level, everyone who's watching this, everyone who's a left-wing person can do stuff to help in some kind of way. I feel like it's the stuff that you're interested in that is the most important. So if you don't like Facebook, I don't think you have to go out and make Facebook and try to make a difference there. But if you're good at something and you like something, if you like Twitter a lot and you make memes there, if you like making TikTok videos, you like YouTube, I think it's best if everyone focuses on the different specialized areas they're in. That's the best way to go about this. Like, I think everyone knows we all have skills, we all have interests, we all have hobbies, we all have things that we like. and we all have areas of our life that are political. And I think we know the best areas personally based off of our own interests that we would be the most passionate to interact in. I think Facebook's a tricky one because a lot of us on the left are not as old, but there is old, I do see some old left-wing people. But I definitely think that a lot of the focus could be on stuff like, I think TikTok is the one that is underutilized for the left. I think that's one that I would encourage people that if you don't, maybe you're on the fence about it, that's the one you should probably go ahead and try and get, because TikTok just has so much more emotional interaction and cultural interaction than the other websites, that people can duet your videos, people can they'll comment on your stuff, people can interact with you in a more, I'll say, intimate way compared to somewhere like Facebook. So TikTok is the one that I do think that if you're on the fence about it, go ahead and get it. But I think ultimately that, everyone has their own kind of skills and talents and stuff like that, I guess. So it's the areas that you want to be in, because if you're not passionate about going into a certain social media website or doing a certain thing, that's not, the results will be meh. But if there is something that you do really like, I think that's the area to go. It might be Instagram, it might be TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. There's tons of, and then in life stuff too, whether it's like community events, like volunteering for like a homeless shelter, or like a boys and girls group and things like that. I think all of us have our different skills and our different talents, and I think it's really important for us to not feel pressured into going to something that we don't want to do. I feel like if we go as a whole, all of us in all these different areas, because we all have different interests, that's how we make a mass movement, a mass change. So I don't think it's just necessarily like one website. I think it's all of us. We get the best, most experienced people on each website who like it, and they go out and they kind of do their thing, and then that will have positive repercussions on that community.
That's awesome. Yeah, authenticity, always the best. One of the things, and maybe this is to challenge that a little bit, so I apologize if this is coming hard at you. One of the things that Mumilak Kakak talked about yesterday was that it really has become almost a black and white world where people kind of live in their bubble. We talk at each other. The conversation isn't there. So if we're just speaking from a place of passion, is there a danger that maybe we are missing people?
I feel like passion can go two ways. So I feel like you can listen just as much as you talk. So I feel like, especially when I talked about like using emotional capital or using cultural capital, a really important part of that is listening to people and listening. If they're a right-wing person, well, why are they right-wing? Is it their family? Did they grow up in a conservative family that was religious or something? I feel like that passion can be really utilized in a good way to listen to people and what they want. I feel like that's something, actually, that's a really good point that I really want to emphasize, is that a big part of this is not just projecting these ideas, it's also listening to people and listening to why they believe in the things they do. If someone's a centrist, they've probably heard, a lot of centrist media, a lot of, maybe their parents were centrist and stuff like that. And the best way to change that person's mind on something is to listen to why they are a centrist and what motivates them to be a centrist. And once you listen, then you can kind of think, okay, can I change this person's mind? Can I create some kind of positive interaction to maybe influence them in some way? Or can I bring them to a community that, maybe they'll change their mind a bit, especially with those right-wing people. That's really hard to do, is listen to the people who are racist, listen to the people who are hateful, because a lot of those people, they might be struggling with mental health issues. They might be struggling from disconnection from society. A lot of those people just want someone to listen. And that's why the people on the right succeed, is because the other people on the right listen to them in those communities. They listen to them and they project those views back at them. But if we on the left listen to what those people have to say and then say, okay, relax, tone down the racism. Okay, you shouldn't say tone down the racism, but if you can say like, relax, there's something deeper here. Your prejudice against immigrants, you blame it on the economy, but really there's something deeper here. And I think that it too. And I feel like listening is a really big part of this because I think centrists, especially right-wing people, they just don't feel that people listen to them. And if we on the left just project theory, if we just project our ideology on these people, they'll just keep resisting. And I feel like listening to them, listening to what they have to say, and then saying, okay, well, you believe in this, you believe that everyone's on an equal footing. Well, picture if you grew up in a really poor household, what it would be like instead. And I feel like that way, listening to people, listening to their concerns, and then adjusting your strategy is the best way to go about being passionate.
That's awesome. And I think one of the things it kind of touches on there that I think is really exciting is one thing that's Harbinger's doing too, is we're talking about building a culture and people talking about culture in the mainstream. I think Harbinger's doing like a sports podcast. You got Kino Lefter on there, which does movies. That's something that I think the us left hasn't seen served well. Is there specific subjects that you think the left has been missing out on? And then I understand we're saying talk about what you're authentically passionate about, but are there specific subject areas that we might help boost, we might help amplify?
Yeah, so exactly. I feel like that applies to like the culture part of what I'm talking about. And like sports is a big one. Hockey, oh, I was a big hockey fan. I kind of lost interest in the pandemic, but I watched hockey since I was a kid, right? Like my family, 3 generations watched hockey, were Leaf fans. But as I got older, I kind of looked at the community in hockey and I'm like, oh my God, I'd start to see the Facebook groups when Black Lives Matter protests happened, and like the Facebook groups would just be so racist. And I really started to realize, wow, like hockey's a very conservative culture. And then it kind of really dawned on me that like, oh, hey, Don Cherry, he's a really racist person. Like as a kid, I always sided with Ron MacLean when I remember being a kid when they were arguing about the Iraq war, and I supported Ron MacLean's side of that. But I didn't really realize until I was older, just how revered Don Cherry was for that racism and stuff like that. It's not just that people liked him, it's people liked his views. They liked the racism. So I feel like sports is a huge one because the demographic is usually men. It's in some areas it's older men. There are young people who like sports, but that number is declining. Like I do know like baseball, younger people don't like that as much. Hockey, other sports. I do believe the fans of people who are really young is lower than previous generations because of stuff like gaming and stuff like that. But sports is a huge one. I really feel like the more left-wing people we get into sports communities, into sports media. I think Steve Dangle's an okay version of it. He's probably like kind of a centrist, but at least him on that show, he's anti-racism. He calls Don Cherry out for the racism. He supports Black Lives Matter. It is nice to see something like that. So I feel like sports is a big one. Video games, gaming, that's another huge one. There is a little niche of like left-wing gamers, but gamers are just, because of people like PewDiePie and stuff like that, it's a very toxic community in some different areas. So I feel like in terms of culture, video games are another big one. Car culture, that's another one, just because car culture typically tends to be so right-wing. I feel like, elements of culture usually have politicization to them, right? So I feel like different like parts of our culture have different political tendencies. Hockey tends to be conservative. Basketball tends to be a little bit more center, I find. So I feel like those communities, that culture, a lot of them become echo chambers. And I know it kind of sounds like I'm pitching like, oh, hey, go talk about leftism in these communities. And that's not the way I'm necessarily saying go about it. But if you look at these communities, they actually are very political. Like the hockey groups I'm a part of on Facebook, I do a lot of like discourse analysis and stuff like that. And a lot of them talk about politics. A lot of them talk about taxes. They talk about gun rights. You wouldn't think that a hockey group would talk about that, but they do a lot. And in those communities, they become echo chambers that people, they respect each other's beliefs more because, oh, hey, you're a Leafs fan. Well, I'm a Leafs fan too. And you're saying that, you don't like Black Lives Matter. Well, that person has an emotional connection with them. They're more likely to listen to them. So if we get more people in those communities to say, hey, buddy, look, I like the Leafs too. I'm a big fan of the Leafs. But think about the black players on the Maple Leafs, think about where they are. We should respect them. We should respect what they're saying. If a black player on the Maple Leafs wants to talk about Black Lives Matter, let's let them talk. that can be a way that we create a bond, we create a connection in that culture and that community, and we'll listen to each other, and that can really help. And unfortunately, right now, those areas just typically tend to be echo chambers. It's unfortunate with culture, but that's where I feel like culture kind of just um, it's like a magnet. It just attracts a certain type of people, and they just listen to that echo chamber.
Yeah. So just to be clear, we're getting close to our final time here. We just had a bomb drop in the chat. Looks like we have Matthew Green in the house.
Yeah, I think I just saw that.
Yeah, he's made a statement here, and I think that we can address this too. So he says, "I'm going to go ahead and let you all talk to the white supremacists, though." And I think that's like an important thing that you've touched on too. Is I think as most of the ideas coming out of this conference are people saying, be more active in your life, be more active with your neighbor, be more active with your friends. I think it's not just enough to like a post you see that's saying Black Lives Matter, not just to like someone else calling out racism. It's like take the labor of 10 minutes or 5 minutes, however long it is, and specifically also go after that individual, go after the statement and fight it, because it really is just a comment. And through the quantity of us coming together and being active in whichever social platform, we can show that there are a lot more of us than the likes might indicate. Did you have any specific thoughts on what we can do when it comes to specifically addressing hateful comments like that?
Yeah, I feel like you have to call that out. You have to say, like, when it's like bad stuff, you have to call that out. There's a what I was saying before, I didn't really mean like be nice to like the white supremacists. I more so meant like those people need to be called out. Those people you need to use your capital as a person to influence those people. I think for the people who are kind of like moderate racists, those are the people who, like for me, when I worked at a workplace and the people I worked with were racist, I try to say to them, like, look, tone it down, like try to be empathetic, like they're probably going to listen to me more because I'm a white person. So I'm trying to do that labor and say to them, like, there's more to this than just what you're thinking. Like you're thinking with your emotions, you're thinking with anger. Try to think empathetically about something and try to let go of what you're believe in from the past and stuff like that. And I definitely think that there's a line there that the people who are, white supremacists, who are racist people, bad people, just call them out. There's certain people who are not worth, there's certain people who are not worth trying to like change or interact. And those people, just call them out and try and stop them from getting their influence. Try to get them banned off Twitter. Try to get them, in trouble in your workplace if they're spewing hate.
Awesome. So we've got a minute left here. How would you like to wrap up with your final thought?
I'll just say here quickly that I feel like what we do at IDC is pretty groundbreaking. I feel like what's happening with Harbinger, what's happening on the left right now, it's really groundbreaking. And if there's one thing you take from what I'm saying, it's just to try to, use emotions, use culture. When you're trying to sell left-wing ideas to your family, your friends, people online, when you're becoming an activist in the community, when you're interacting with people, try to use a different strategy. Try to create connections. Try to create references so people like you, so people understand you. Try to build communities, because that's what we have to do on the left. We just don't have the money. We have to build this stuff at a grassroots level. We have to make connections, and we have to work together at a grassroots level to get this stuff solved in time for the climate crisis and the 50 other crises that we have right now.
Yeah, and growing every day. Keifer, thank you so much for your time. It was greatly appreciated. I would also like to encourage everyone to, check you out on Twitter. Check out Budrino Politics. I think it was really interesting. I think you called the conservative election fairly decently with like the vote count and whatnot. And for the Green Party, I think just like internal conversations, you called the Green Party down to a T on what Dimitri Lascaris needed to win, etc. So if you want to have some like eerily on point takes, check out Budrino. He knows his business.
Thanks. Awesome. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Sir. Take care.
See ya.